So today's topic is a very interesting one indeed. The reason why I recited the verses in the beginning from the Quran pertaining to some historical events that took place in the past, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that, have you not seen what happened to the people of Ad and the people of Thamud? And these people were very, very powerful. They used to carve mountains. They used to carve mountains and make homes out of these mountains. Those of you who have been to northern Saudi Arabia or southern Jordan, there's a place called Petra, or in northern Saudi Arabia there are Madain Saleh. If you go to these places, you will see mountains carved. People have carved, in some cases, palaces, big buildings, dwelling places out of mountains. There's a rock, there's a like stone, a giant mountain, and they carved it. How they carved it is another question altogether. But Allah is giving an example of these people. That look at these people in the past. Look what happened to them. Alam tara, do you not see? Allah is drawing your attention to them. So primarily Allah is speaking to the followers of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and then through them, through the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Allah is speaking to the world, because they are the ones who brought the Quran to us, right? They're the ones who preserved the Quran for posterity. So Allah is making history a very powerful point. History is very, very important to learn lessons. You forget your history, you forget yourselves. You forget your past, you forget your present, and you will never know what the future holds for you, because you're simply lost. That's why reading, learning, understanding history of your own and others is an absolute must in Al-Islam. Why do I say that? I say that because the Quran says so. The Quran keeps mentioning people of the past. The Quran keeps telling you about those who were punished by Allah due to their extremism, due to their injustice, due to their immorality, unethical practices. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed certain nations in the past from the scene because they had gone too far in their crimes. And what were these crimes? Most of these crimes were of social nature. They were harming each other. They were doing injustice to each other. When they were doing business, they were doing it unethically. The people of Shu'aib alayhi salam, right? Yeah? Or the people of Lut alayhi salam. Yes? And the people of Saleh. And the people of Hud. Right? All these people, they were socially unjust. There were injustice taking place in these nations. That's why Allah removed them. So when injustice starts to arise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the status of some people through it, and others are degraded because of injustice. Let me explain. Whose status is raised when injustice arises? The people of the haqq, the people who stand for justice, the people who stand for the truth, the people who defend the oppressed and the poor and the downgraded, right? So these people, when injustice arises, it emerges, people of justice are raised. Their status is raised because they take a stand. Today we will talk about a similar personality, Tipu Sultan. Not very well known in the non-Indian world. When I say the non-Indian world, I mean outside of the subcontinent. The subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, what we call in Arabic Shibh al-Qara al-India, okay, consists of currently at least 4 countries. At least. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And this personality I'm going to talk about is very well known in the Indian subcontinent. Unfortunately, not much has been written on him in the Arabic language, so not many people know of him in the Arabic world. But he is no less special than Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. He is no less special than that Sultan. as we will see in due course very quickly. Sultan Salahuddin is known for his deeds, his battles, his character, his demeanor, his behavior towards the other, and all of that. We have read so much about him, we have heard so much about him, right? Does everyone know Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi? Yes? Right? Who knew about Tipu Sultan before this lecture? Put your hands up. Okay, 5 or 6, 7 brothers. I would say majority didn't know. Okay, so today is your time to know him and see why he's special. This man was a king in southern India, and I want to do a very quick background on him. The reason we are talking about him is because we consider him a special person. He's one of our heroes in our history, a Muslim hero for a number of reasons. Other people consider him a hero as well, like some Indian nationalists. Those are not part of the government at the moment. India is governed by a political party called BJP, right? BJP is very much against any Muslim hero. They have something with Muslims and Islam for some reason, okay? They came to power through this rhetoric, using anti-Islam, anti-Muslim rhetoric. They came to power through this rhetoric. Now the Prime Minister of India is none other than this man called Narendra Modi, okay? And he's known to be a very anti-Islam activist, right? In fact, he is accused. I'm going to use the word accused, although I have no doubts. But we have to be fair, because Indian courts acquitted him. How that happened is another question altogether. He's accused of masterminding, or at least being complacent in the Gujarat genocide that took place in 2003, where at least 3,000 Muslims are killed in the state of Gujarat in India. So his party and people around him are very much against any achievements Muslims or Islam did for India. That's why they changed recently the name of a road. It was called Aurangzeb Road, right? Aurangzeb Alamgir was a Muslim emperor, a Mughal emperor, who governed from 1658 to 1707. He was one of the most powerful Muslim kings and one of the most Islamic Muslim kings in the history of India, and he governed the largest chunk of the Indian peninsula ever governed by another Muslim king, or any Muslim king. So he is very much hated by BJP and Bajrang Dal and RSS. These are the names of some organizations. Some are military wings and others are political wings, right? So there is a lot of rhetoric on Indian media nowadays about this, right? Likewise, Tipu Sultan is seen as a villain because he was a Muslim bigot. That's what's claimed, that he was a Muslim bigot because he loved Islam so much. He was so close to Islam. Everything about him was Islamic. As we will see what happens in due course, we will discuss his character and the type of person, the kind of person he was. For that reason, he has nothing to do with India. First of all, he's an alien. He represents an alien culture. This is the rhetoric we hear on Indian news channels nowadays, in the mouths of Indian politicians belonging to BJP. There are others who challenge this, no doubt. There are other Hindu scholars and activists who are very fair, who are very objective. They challenge this rhetoric. They come back and they say, no, Tipu Sultan, to the contrary, was actually a great personality. He was the first person to effectively fight the British for independence, because he had realized that the British are taking all of India, slowly and steadily. They are taking all of India, and he, having realized that threat, fought against the threat. So he was the first freedom fighter in that sense. So a lot of Hindu nationalists defend him. But the others, anti-Islam bigots, anti-Muslim bigots, they say no, anyone who was good for Islam and Muslims, or who represented Muslims religiously, is a villain. So anyone, the stronger your connection to Islam, the bigger villain you are, according to the current Indian political rhetoric pumped out in the media on daily basis. Okay? So recently the state of Karnataka, which is in the south of India, which is where the state of Mysore is, the state Tipu Sultan and his father governed. The state of Karnataka is called Karnataka. They wanted to celebrate a day for Tipu Sultan. And a lot of these BJP activists came out and they said, no, you cannot do that. He's got nothing to do with us. He's not Indian. He doesn't represent us. And they start to, glorify people like Shivaji, a Maratha fighter who fought against Aurangzeb Alamgir, not the British. Okay? Amazingly, when Tipu Sultan was defeated by the British, Marathas were siding with the British. Even though Tipu Sultan had made advances towards the Marathas, he was asking them, inviting them to come and join, because I am Indian, they are not. I am a son of this land. I am defending this land against the aggressor, against the tyrant, against the oppressor, someone who doesn't love you, someone who doesn't care about you. All that person or this establishment or this company, East India Company, cares about is its coffers, its pockets. So, when the state of Karnataka announced this day, there was a lot of noise on the media. So there were scholars who were defending, historians defending Tipu Sultan, that he was not what you are saying he was. You are lying, you are twisting facts, you are manipulating history to do politics, what they call Rajniti. Okay? You're doing Rajniti over history, right? So don't use history for your lame politics. Okay? Leave history for historians. Others say, no, Tipu Sultan did this, he did that, he demolished that particular temple, he, imprisoned the Christians of Kurd, and examples like that. When you pick and choose from someone's actions and forget about all the good he has done, that's what they were doing. This is why a woman came forward and she wrote this book. It's a very short introduction to Tipu Sultan. It's called The Life of Tipu Sultan, Tiger. He was known as the Tiger of Mysore, even by the British. Okay? Her name is Kate Brittleback. This book has been recently published. Literally few weeks ago, it was published in India. It is only available in India, and I received it in post from one of my friends who is in India, who is a great researcher on Tipu Sultan. He's a South Indian Christian. He's a good friend of mine, and he has his views on Tipu Sultan, and he has done plenty of research. So he's a close friend of mine. I'm in touch with him, and he's the one who sent me this in post. So unfortunately, it's only available in India at the moment, but it's a good introduction to his life. She wrote this book to demystify the picture. That you guys are saying all these things, but this is the reality. This is the truth. You cannot separate Tipu Sultan from his times. What he did was necessary for his times. He was living in the 18th century India. He was not living in 21st century Delhi or even Karnataka. Things have changed. People have changed. Perceptions have changed. Minds have changed. Thinkings have changed. So judge him according to his times, the circumstances he was living in, not according to your own standards, because things have changed. So anachronism is a crime in history. When you use a 21st or use a standard for the 21st century and apply it to people living 5 centuries ago somewhere else. It doesn't work like that. So who was Tipu Sultan? He was born in the year 1750. He was the son of Sultan Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali was a soldier of fortune. He was an adventurer who was not very well educated. And before I go into his ancestry and other issues, I'll cut the long story short. That Hyder Ali belonged to, according to most historians, to an Arabic stock. He descended from the Arabs. Okay, his ancestors were Arabs. There are other opinions in this regard also, but I believe the strongest opinion is that he descended from the Arabs, and his ancestors, his grandfather or great-grandfather, had traveled to India, and first he came to Delhi. His name was Wali Muhammad. He came to Delhi, and from Delhi they traveled down south, and they settled in south. some of his children, like Hyder Ali's father and his grandfather, they got married to local women, and then they had children, and then they became soldiers of fortune. They actually belonged to a family of ascetics. You know what ascetic is? You know, people Zahid and people Zuhada. You know, Zuhad. Is that the plural of Zahid? Yeah? Is that the plural in Arabic? Zuhad, that's right. That's correct. So they belong to that kind of stock. You know, they didn't take part in politics. They didn't want to get involved in politics. They didn't want, because they would just lock themselves in places and just make dhikr and that kind of people they were. But then Tipu Sultan's grandfather was the first person to join an army, and he became involved in politics. His son Hyder Ali grew up in very difficult circumstances. When the father, Hyder Ali's father, died, he left behind a widow and 2 sons. And one of those sons was Hyder Ali. She faced extreme difficulties because she was in debt, and the local Nawab, the local king in one of the South Indian states, he pressured her to pay back the debt. So she moved, cut the long story short, to Mysore. It's a place called Mysore, which was governed till now by a Hindu dynasty. Since the 13th century, this dynasty was governing this part. Primarily or earlier on behalf of another empire called Vijayanagar Empire, which was a Hindu empire in South India. Primarily they started governing on their behalf, but later on, from the 16th century onward, 1560s, this dynasty came to be known as Zudiyar dynasty. They started to govern independently. So now they have been governing for almost 2 centuries independently, from mid 16th century to mid 18th century. So Hyder Ali moved as a child, who was born in 1720, by the way. Hyder Ali was born in 1720, who moved to Mysore, this small state of 33 villages. Are you listening? It was a small state of 33 villages. Vodiyar state called Mysore. Mysore was a state of 33 villages. Tipu Sultan's father moved there as a child and was entered into Mysorean army, right? Because his uncle was already an officer in the army, so it was easy for him to enter the army. So Hyder Ali, being a very shrewd soldier, made his way up through the ranks of the army. Cut the long story short, because of his intelligence, because of his decisions, because of certain things he did, by the year 1760, he had become the most powerful man in Mysore. He had become the top general. There are many details I can share as to what happened to Hyder Ali. That's another lecture. Hyder Ali, the father of Tipu Sultan, is another lecture in itself. So I'm not going to go into that. I'm more concerned about Tipu Sultan. So Hyder Ali by 1760 became the de facto ruler of the state of Mysore, governed by Vodiyar Rajas. So what he did was, he did not remove the Raja, the king of Vodiyar state, from power. Rather, he said, I am the caretaker. So he did a political game. What he did was, which is true, this is exactly what happened. He realized that the Raja is simply a puppet in the hands of a number of different advisors. He doesn't have his own resort. He doesn't have the strength and the confidence to make decisions. So he took advantage of the situation. Hyder Ali, there was a vacuum of power left for him. He filled it. He came in and he took power. And he said to the Raja, you remain a puppet Raja as you were before me anyway. I will run the state for you. And the military belonged to him. He was the general. He was the head of the military. So he started to fight battles. He started to expand the territory. Now from a principality of 33 villages, this state became an empire in southern India. It became so big because of the hard work of Hyder Ali that the British, the Marathas and the Nizam, there were 3 major powers in India at this time. Now I don't want to go back to the background of what happened to the Mughals. That's very important, but again that's another lecture in itself. Because if I start talking about the background, I will be lost in the background. Okay, so I will cut the long story short. The most powerful Mughal emperor, when the Mughal Empire was at its peak, died in the year 1707. Aurangzeb Alamgir. Okay, Muhyiddin Aurangzeb Alamgir. Okay, he's the man behind Fatawa Alamgiriya. Have you heard of it? Or there's a book, a collection of Hanafi Fatawa. You know, we have 4 schools of thought in Islam, right? Okay, 4 main schools of thought, right? There are many schools, but there are 4 main schools of thought. We have Hanafi, Maliki, Hanbali and Shafi'i schools, right? So every school has its, one of its compendiums to refer to for Fatawa. For Hanabila, for Hanbalis, we have Al-Mughni of Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, right? For Hanafis, the largest collection of fatawas, of rulings, okay, or the largest collection of jurisprudential work is Fatawa Alamgiriya. It is known in Arabic language. It was written in Arabic, and it is also known as Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiya. Okay, so Alamgir was responsible for this. He was very Islamic in his living. He was very simple man. He was the most powerful king India ever witnessed. And in fact, in his time, 25 or 23% of world's GDP, 23% of world's entire planet's GDP was in India in the time of Aurangzeb. This is how powerful he was politically, economically, militarily. He was one of the largest powers in the world, Aurangzeb Alamgir. When he died in 1707, a sharp decline happened. His children, his grandchildren started to fight each other for the throne. Cut the long story short, it's a painful story. What happened between 1707 and 1760 is just a disaster. Disaster upon disaster. Many invasions. The Afghans came in, Ahmad Shah Abdali, a man, he came in, he invaded India. Then the Iranians, the Persians came in, Nadir Shah in 1739, he invaded India and he decimated the remaining prestige of the Mughal Empire in 1739. And there was a Mughal emperor on the throne at the time. His name was Muhammad Shah. Muhammad Shah was known as a weakling, although he governed for almost 29 years, but he's known in history as a weakling. He didn't do much. He was just busy singing, dancing and smoking hookah. This is what he was doing. His pastime was simply playing chess and passing his time as a king. So all of this caused local powers to arise. People, because when there is a vacuum of power, someone will come in and fill it, right? You leave vacuum for power. If you don't have strong leaders running the affairs, someone will come in and fill the gap. So when the Mughals declined, the center became weakened in Delhi. Delhi was the capital. And this is the time when Shah Waliullah, Muhaddis al-Dehlavi was writing. I've done a lecture on that already, so you can go back to that lecture and listen to what I have to say there. This is the time when Hyder Ali came to power. He arose. So what's happening in India by 1760? Who are the major powers in India? Who are the major powers politically and economically or militarily? We have the British. The British, who came as merchants, and they established merchant colonies in different places. For example, they established a colony in Bombay, one in Calcutta, okay, in Bengal, okay, and one was there was another city, I forgot the name completely. Okay, no problem. So there are 3 main colonies, and they started to do business. So they got farmans from the Mughal emperors. Farman, the permission to do business, and tax will be low on them. So they got some privileges, some leniency from the Mughal emperors, and they started to do business. The British could not even in their wildest dreams imagine that one day they will become the masters of this golden, in India is known as Sone ki Chidiya, yeah, in our language, yeah. It was known as Sone ki Chidiya even at that time, the golden sparrow. The golden sparrow. The British could not, because India was rich. It was one of the richest places in the world. Name it, gold, silver, diamonds, the mines of Golconda in southern India, today nowadays in Deccan. They were supplying the world when it came to diamonds. Okay, there were European merchants traveling to India to buy diamonds, to buy precious stones. One of them was Tavernier, who traveled to India in the time of Aurangzeb Alamgir. Tavernier was a French traveler who was a diamond merchant. He came to India specifically to the mines of Golconda. Now they have been exhausted. There's nothing left there, unfortunately. But it was the richest place on the planet. The British could not even in their wildest dreams imagine. So they came as merchants in the time of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I sent out, that was the maritime period, when a lot of ships and merchants were coming out, the period of exploration when they went to the Americas, and then the slave trade started, and then many Portuguese and Dutch and French and British merchants came out in the ships and they started to explore the world, and that was one of the biggest disasters in the history of humanity, because with this exploration came colonialism. Okay, colonization started to begin, because that's when European explorers realized how much of a potential there is out there, how much of a land is out there, and how easily they can take all these lands and this wealth. So what happened? So the British were, by this time, 1760, they had fought few battles with the local Nawabs and rulers, and they were victorious. One battle in particular, fought in 1757, was called the Battle of Plassey. In this battle, the British, being a merchant establishment, they had a private army, and the reason why they had a private army was to defend or protect their own interests, their own business. Okay, so merchant establishments even had built fortresses to protect themselves, right? So they fought the local Nawab. Nawab is like a king, or he is like a governor, but these governors later on, when the Mughal Empire crumbled, we had many local principalities emerge as a result. So we had the state of Awadh, okay, in the north of India. Then we had the state of Bengal, again, in northeast of India. Okay, so Bengal was governed by, at that time, a man called Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla, who was defeated in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 by the British. And now the British had realized the potential they had. Wow, we have defeated this Nawab with one of the most powerful armies in India. And this happened through cunning, by the way. Lord Clive was the man who defeated the Nawab. Nawab had 50,000 men fighting for him, and Clive had 5,000. So imagine 5,000 men defeating an army of 50,000 men. How it was done? You have to go and read the details. What happened? How can 5,000 men? It was an impossible battle for Clive, but he was able to buy a man called Mir Jafar. Mir Jafar is known as a traitor to this day in the history of Pakistan and India. Even poets have paid tributes to them, negative tributes, by the way. There's Iqbal's poetry, Jafar as Bengal, Sadiq as Deccan. Sadiq is the one who betrayed Tipu Sultan. So there were two Mirs, Mir Jafar and Mir Sadiq. They are known as classic traitors in the history of India. Traitors. There are many traitors we read about in the history of humanity, but in India, when you will talk about traitors, what names will come up? Mir Jafar and Mir Sadiq. Because Mir Jafar betrayed the Nawab of Bengal, and that's why Clive was able to defeat the Nawab. And then Mir Sadiq is the one who betrayed Tipu Sultan in the final battle, 1799, when Tipu Sultan was killed. So after this battle, the British, they realized, and then another battle, cut the long story short, took place. Is called the Battle of Buxar. The Battle of Buxar, 1764. This was the final blow. That was it. This was the beginning of British imperialism in India. In this battle, the British defeated three armies. Hector Munro was a general who fought three local armies. The army of the state of Awadh, the army of Bengal, led by Mir Qasim, and the army of the Mughal king himself, Shah Alam II. And because there were divisions between these three armies belonging to the same establishment, the Mughal establishment, they had differences among themselves. Right in the thick of the battle, one army left completely, and that demoralized the entire army, right? And then the British were able to take advantage of that. 1764, that's it. This is now the beginning of the rise of the British Empire in India, the British Raj, and it was conducted or controlled by the East India Company. It was a merchant company, it was a merchant establishment. They came for business, but now they became rulers of states. They became de facto rulers of three states in India, or three provinces, very, very rich provinces: Bengal, Orissa, and Bihar. These were the most fertile states or provinces of India. This was the breadbasket of the Mughal Empire. Once the Mughal lost it, it was all going downhill. So the British became the tax collectors of these states, and they would give some money to the Mughal emperor, but they would keep the rest, right? So that gave them a lot of power. So they could invest this money in military arsenal, and they became a very, very big power. Now we had another power in the south rising called the Marathas, the Hindus. Okay, they wanted to establish a Hindu Padshahī, which is the Hindu Empire, the return of the Hindu Empire in India. Okay, get rid of these Muslims who came from the north, okay, invaders. This is how they saw the Muslims, by the way. Yeah? Although the Muslims had done more for India than all of these guys put together. The British and the Marathas put together, seriously. The Muslims, the Mughals, and the Delhi Sultanate, what they did for India in terms of culture, literature, knowledge, architecture, art, you name it, they had it. Okay. So Marathas were a destructive force. They came out and they took advantage of this vacuum. Then another state emerged, very powerful state in the south of India, a Muslim state called Hyderabad, Deccan. Deccan, the state of Deccan was governed by the Nizam. Okay, Nizam was the title of the kings. Okay, like you have titles of king, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Then you had the Kisras of Persia. So Nizam was a title, which means, what does Nizam mean?
Head of state.
Sorry? No, head of state, but Nizam, the word Nazm, is come from Nazm. Organized, systematic. Yani, Nizam al-Mulk, the title comes from Nizam al-Mulk. Okay? So Nizam was, and the fourth power rising was Mysore. The state of Mysore. Hyder Ali now had worried all of these three powers through his incursions and increasing expansion, and he was a staunch defender of Indian independence, and he wanted the British to get out. So he had his focus on the British, and he tried to join hands with the Nizam. Occasionally they did, but the Nizams were not willing to permanently support Hyder Ali. So the British fought 4 wars, not battles. There were hundreds of battles between the state of Mysore and the British and the Marathas and the Nizam. Okay, so this state of Mysore in the middle is fighting 3 powers simultaneously, on and off, occasionally. So the state of Mysore is fighting the British in the north. Okay, in the east they have Deccan, and northwest they have Marathas. Okay, so they are fighting 3 powers. But Hyder Ali, being a very shrewd leader, self-made man, a ruler, an illiterate man, he came to rise. And even though he was illiterate, didn't know how to read and write, but he was an absolutely amazing general, absolutely genius. Okay, so he fought the first Mysore War, which took place between 1761 to 1762. If I'm getting 1765 to 1769. This was the first Mysore War that took place between Hyder Ali and the British. Okay, and it was this time when his son Tipu Sultan was put in the battlefield. Tipu Sultan was born, his son was born 1750, and he was put in the battlefield to go and fight the battles for his father and for the state of Mysore. So the state of Mysore has now become a power. So Hyder Ali now realized, having fought the British a number of times, that they are very advanced, they are very disciplined, their weapons are very advanced. So we need to up our game. We need to up our standard. So what does Hyder Ali do? Hyder Ali gets French help. The French were already fighting the British on the global scene, right? The French were fighting, Napoleon came later. This hostility between the French and English is older than Napoleon. Napoleon inherited it, right? So delegations from Mysore had been sent to France to discuss the details. So some people were hired by Hyder Ali into his army to train the army, to discipline the army, to be equals, if not better, to be equals of the British army, right? And then weapon technology was brought in from France, and they started to build their own weapons in Seringapatam. So Hyder Ali started to do all these things, right? So Hyder Ali, having left a very powerful state, governed effectively. There were times he nearly was killed in battle. I mean, for the details you have to go to their biographies. There are few written, and please remind me before I finish the lecture, I will recommend some sources for you to go and look at, inshallah ta'ala. So the French were hired by Hyder Ali to be effective enough against the British. So the second Mysore war took place between 1780 to 1784. For 4 years the war continued, many battles were fought, and the British, they lost heavily. One of the battles called the Battle of Polilar. In this battle, Tipu Sultan, who is by now in his 30s, okay, has inflicted severe damage to the British side, okay. In fact, one of the entire battalions was captured by Tipu Sultan, and it was remembered by the British for a very long time. There are few disasters in the British military history as far as Indian subcontinent is concerned, and they have remembered them well. One of those disasters was the Battle of Polilar, which was fought during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, in which Tipu Sultan inflicted heavy losses on the British side. And the same general, are you listening carefully? The same general who defeated 3 Muslim armies in the Battle of Buxar, 1764. Remember I mentioned that, right? The same general, Hector Munro, had to run for his life in this very battle. In this very battle against Tipu Sultan, who was a young lad at the time, young man, you know. And Tipu Sultan, you know, I don't want to go too much into his military incursions and his military prowess and his military achievements, because those you can get from books, from biographies. What I want to talk about is the man Tipu Sultan. Okay, so he had become a nightmare for the British, and there were so many works produced on him in London that when you pick up the books published in 1780s and 1790s and even after 1800s, you'll be shocked to see the amount of attention Tipu Sultan and respect and envy and insults he received, because he became the grand villain in Britain. They started to do plays, you know, plays like in theatres. There were plays in London in theatres depicting Tipu Sultan as the biggest villain in the history of humanity. He is the main culprit of crimes in the world. Okay, he is the biggest enemy of civilization. He is the biggest enemy of peace and justice. He is the biggest enemy of, you know, anything that's good. That's how he was painted in Britain at that time, because the British army fighting in India needed this justification to continue with these wars, expensive wars in India, right? So this is how tabloid, you remember the newspapers nowadays, media, what the media is doing nowadays, exactly the same thing happening at that time. You want to justify a war, you want the people to get on your side, go to the media. BBC, Sky News is your tools, Fox News. Tipu Sultan was painted as the grand villain, you know, in Britain at the time. Plays were written on him, books were written on him, and there was so much I have some of them in my possession, the original works from the 18th century. I've been collecting them for a very long time. I have fascination with history, so I've been collecting these works, and they're very interesting. So the British primarily painted Tipu Sultan as a villain, as a bigot, as a tyrant, but the reality was the contrary, because even when you are attacking your enemy, sometimes, somewhere, you cannot resist the truth, right? Sometimes you can just say, oh yeah, he did something good here and there, you know, there was something good about him and there. So they wrote occasionally, the British authors Those who traveled through Mysore when Tipu Sultan was governing, they said it's like a paradise. The place is so prosperous, the fields are, there is so much security here. And his state was well defended. Well defended. And it was one of the richest states in India at the time. One of the most stable states. The reason why it didn't remain stable is because of the attacks from Marathas, from the Nizam, and from the British. Because they couldn't allow it. So this man was a very special man. So in this battle, he inflicted heavy losses. There was a third battle, or the war, the third Anglo-Mysore War. So there were 4 Anglo-Mysore wars. The number one was 1765 to 1769. Number 2, 1780 to 1784. Number 3, 1790 to 1792. This proved to be a disaster for Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan, cut the long story short, because 3 armies fought him again. They got together, they allied themselves. The allies fought Tipu Sultan, right? Who were the allies? Nizam, Marathas, and the British. Okay, Nizam of Hyderabad, a Muslim, Marathas, Hindus, and British, the Westerners or the Christians, if there were any Christian at that time. Whether they were Christian or not is another question altogether. Yeah. So they fought, and Tipu Sultan, as a result, lost half his territory. Half his territory. As a result, he had to relinquish half his territory and pay a ransom of 3 crore rupees, which was a lot of money at the time, and he had to put 2 of his sons as hostages with the British general at the time, Cornwallis. So 2 of Tipu Sultan's sons, Muhyiddin and Muizzuddin, 2 of his sons were put as hostages with Cornwallis as a guarantee, right? Until Tipu Sultan is able to raise the funds to compensate for the war. So they fought the war, they attacked him, and they charged him for the money they spent on the war, so which was amounted to 3 crore rupees. Plus they split the territory of Tipu Sultan between the 3 powers. Marathas took some portion, the British took some portion, and the Nizam took some portion. That was the 3rd Anglo-Mysore War. The 4th Anglo-Mysore War, now Tipu Sultan, after the 3rd Anglo-Mysore War, Tipu Sultan named his state Sultanate-e-Khudadad. Sultanate-e-Khudadad means God-given state. It is a God-given state. God gave it, God took it. So he called it that. On his coins, you can see that point very well stated. So after this, Tipu Sultan became even more adamant and determined to do something about it. He started writing letters to the Marathas, asking them to join him against the foreign power, because this foreign power is exploiting our differences, our divisions, because all they want is money. They are here for money. They are merchants. They are merchants by origin. Okay, East India Company has no interest in the well-being of the local populations, and this is clearly evident. Works written by British authors writing in Bengal. They were fair, just people within the British establishment who were like we have today. There are so many fair people, so many just and beautiful and upright people who defend the truth, who stand by the oppressed, right? And I can say so many names. There are so many names in this. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is one of them. I mean, I believe he's a fair guy. He's a fair guy. The reason why he's feared by the establishment is because he is not towing their line. Okay? So there were people like that writing in the 18th century. So in 1770s, people wrote works how the East India Company, having taken Bengal, have caused a disaster. There was a famine in Bengal in the 18th century, in 1770s, which killed millions, okay, because of the policies of the East India Company. So Tipu Sultan was making these points that what is wrong with you people, the Nizam and the Marathas, why are you joining this? Join me! But they were scared of Tipu Sultan. Nizam was scared, and so were the Marathas, because they were corrupt. He was not corrupt. He was uncorruptible. They knew he was not corrupt. He was a very Muslim man, a very well observed, he observed Islamic rituals to the best of his ability, as we will talk about it in due course very quickly, inshallah. So that didn't work. Finally, Tipu Sultan started to communicate with even the Americans. Believe it or not, Tipu Sultan's diplomacy, it is mind-blowing. There were other Nawabs and rulers in India at the time. They were all busy in singing and dancing, singing girls, smoking hookah. This famous picture aware of here. They're leaning on the pillow and there's mujra taking place here. The woman is dancing in front of them and they're drinking wine and they're smoking hookah, and then they sign anything away. The British come to them, "Hey, Allah, go, leave me alone in my opium and this is how they were. Most rulers in India, whether they were Hindus or Muslims, this is how they were. This is how they were behaving. Tipu Sultan was different. This was a man who would wake up at Fajr time, pray Fajr and not sleep. He would run the state like a ruler, right? He loves his people like his own children. You know how many Hindus were crying when he was killed? There were more Hindus because the majority of his state were Hindus. He governed a majority Hindu state, Mysore. They were crying more than the Muslims were. Now, the Muslims are not mourning his death, but Hindus are devastated because he was so loving and just to them. And there are many more examples. So, when he communicated with the French, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was in Egypt at the time, had promised that he will come once he's done with Egypt. Not that Tipu Sultan wanted him to conquer Egypt, but Tipu Sultan was focusing on his own situation. So French were an option. He said, okay, I need the French support. Then he sent a delegation even to America. Thomas Jefferson, in one of his letters, mentions specifically that the embassy of Tipu Sahib has arrived and I will have a meeting with them. Okay, it is clearly mentioned by Thomas Jefferson in one of his letters. And amazingly, during the War of Independence, the Americans had a naval battle against a British naval contingent. Okay, this battle was a small battle. Okay, it only consisted of 4 ships on each side, 4 vessels on each side. Okay, 4 British vessels, 4 American vessels. Listen carefully. And this battle took place in 1787, if I'm not mistaken. 1787, the War of Independence, fought in the US. Okay, and this battle was called the Battle of Delaware. It's a naval battle fought between the British and the Americans. Okay, you know one of the vessels, what one of the vessels was called? One of the American vessels, it was called Hyder Ali. The Americans called one of their vessels Hyder Ali to taunt the British, because this was taking place after the Second Anglo-Mysore War, in which the British had received heavy blows, right? So the Americans were even supported by Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali was sending messages to the Americans that we will support you in your war of independence. Now, this is how big these people were thinking. Their thinking was not local, their little table, their little pitch, their little neighborhood, or their little throne and their little hookah and their little girl dancing in front of them. They were not, these guys, Hyder Ali was a thinker. He was thinking beyond his state. So was Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan was actually trained by his father. The only difference is Tipu Sultan was a lot more learned because he was taught systematically by his father, a lot more religious than his father, and a lot more heartly. He thought more from his heart than his mind. His father was a very astute, shrewd politician. Okay? Tipu Sultan, sometimes because of his principles, he faced setbacks. Because of his principles. And his father was very crude. When it came to politics, he was a very, very decisive, crude politician. Tipu Sultan, some of the mistakes he made, that he removed someone from power for making some mistakes, and then afterwards they would come back and ask for forgiveness, and he would, okay, go back to you. So he was soft. His softness was detrimental. So when the British realized that Tipu Sultan is communicating with global powers, he sent letters to the Ottoman Sultan in Turkey. There's an entire book written on this very topic, the embassy of Tipu Sultan to the Ottoman Sultan in Turkey. So we were talking about Tipu Sultan's correspondence with international powers, global powers at the time, because this man was not only concerned about India in particular, he wanted to have global alliances. That's why he wrote to the Sultan of Turkey, he wrote to Thomas Jefferson, and when people claim that he was a bigot a Muslim bigot. If that was the case, why would he be writing to Thomas Jefferson? Why would he be writing to form an alliance with Napoleon Bonaparte? Why? Napoleon. Why would he be writing to other rulers? He was open to alliances. He was open to business. He wanted to do business with everyone. He wanted to make his state prosperous, right? And he was pursuing the Islamic policy. What was the Islamic policy? Islamic policy is that you give peace when you get peace, okay? And you defend yourself when you're attacked. This is the Islamic policy. This is exactly what he was pursuing. He was defending himself, his interests, right? And he felt threatened like the others felt threatened by him. He felt threatened by them. So he was threatened by the British day and night. And he was threatened by the Marathas. He was threatened by the Nizam of Deccan. So he had three major powers, local powers, fighting him continuously. This man was in a continuous state of war. All he had seen was conflict since the time he was born, because his father was a general, right, and a successful general who became a de facto ruler of a state. And then his son Hyder Ali died in 1782. When the second Anglo-Mysore war was taking place, Hyder Ali, the father of Tipu Sultan, died in the middle of the war, not the battle, the war, because the war lasted for 4 years. So Hyder Ali died in the middle, 1782, leaving his son behind, alone to deal with these three major threats he was facing at home. So for this reason, he started to communicate with others to gain support. And for that reason, Tipu Sultan wrote a letter to the king of Afghanistan. King of Afghanistan was none other than Shah Zaman. His name was Shah Zaman, who was a grandson of Ahmad Shah. Ahmad Shah is the man who made what we know today as Afghanistan. He is the one who named this territory Afghanistan. Prior to Afghanistan, it was known as Khorasan, and prior to that it was known as Aryan. Okay? Ariana. Okay? So Ahmad Shah was a Pashtun leader born in Kandahar, okay, and he was a general serving for Nadir Shah. After the death of Nadir Shah, Ahmad Shah annexed Afghanistan from Nadir Shah. So Nadir Shah was the ruler of Afghanistan as well. But when he died, Nadir Shah died, Ahmad Shah claimed sovereignty over Afghanistan, this territory. He said, keep Iran, but Afghanistan belongs to us, the Pashtuns. So he took Afghanistan and he made a very powerful state. And having done that, he invaded India few times. For the rich, I mean, he fought Mughals. Mughals were Muslims, he was Muslim. He was invading India because he saw Mughals as corrupt. They are just useless. Okay, so he came in and he attacked Mughals few times, and he took a lot of money back, a lot of wealth back with him, right? So he became very, very powerful in the 1760s, and he's the one who defeated an army of the Marathas in a battle called the Battle of Panipat. The third battle of Panipat, it is known. It was fought in 1761, and Ahmad Shah, with an alliance of other Muslim rulers in India, including the early Nizam, not the later one, the early Nizam, and another Nawab called Nawab Najibud-Dawla, they got together because the Marathas were devastating Muslim villages, Muslim settlements. They were coming in, they were devastating the Muslim settlements. And this is why Shah Waliullah, one of the scholars in Delhi, we have talked about him before, he wrote a letter to the king of Afghanistan, Ahmad Shah. He asked him to come and rescue the Muslims of India because the Mughals can't do it. The Mughals are simply not able to do it. So he wrote letters to Najibud-Dawla, he wrote letters to Nizam, and he wrote letters to Ahmad Shah. Now these were three Sunni powers, okay? And Shah Waliullah perceived the Shia state of Awadh as a threat because the state of Awadh had allied itself with the Marathas, the Hindus. So the state of Awadh, which was primarily, basically Shia, they had allied themselves. This is an academic point. I'm not making a sectarian point here. This is a fact. This is a historical fact. Okay. So I'm not pulling any cheap shots here. This is a fact, and this is how it is. The state of Awadh was allied with the Marathas and the Jats. So Shah Waliullah specifically mentions Safdar Jang, the Shia ruler of the state of Awadh, and the Jat ruler. I forgot his name. There's so many names and dates in my mind. I'm forgetting some of them. So the Jat ruler, he mentioned them by name when he wrote the letter to the king of Afghanistan that these two people are threatening our existence. The state of Awadh and the Jat ruler, okay, and the Marathas. So we need rescue. We need someone to come and help us, right? So he wrote letters to these Sunni powers in India and outside India. So Ahmad Shah came, Najib-ud-Dawla joined him, Nizam also came and joined. A battle took place in 1761, the Battle of Panipat, and the Marathas were crushed. For the next 20 years, Marathas did not think of North India. They did not come back to northern India because they were completely crushed in this battle. It was his grandson called Zaman Shah, who was the ruler of Afghanistan in the 1790s. It is to him Tipu Sultan wrote a letter with similar content to Shah Waliullah. I am a Muslim power in the south. I am only hunted by these hostile neighbors is because I am a Muslim. Okay, I uphold Islam as my religion and I am a staunch Muslim. So for this reason I am being attacked. You are a Muslim, your grandfather did this, you need to come and help me. Okay, so he had a plan, he had devised a plan that you come from the north, Afghanistan, right? I come from the south, and we appoint an able king on the throne of Delhi, because on the throne of Delhi there was a man called Shah Alam. Shah Alam had been blinded by one of his own henchmen, and he was a completely useless ruler, like he was just a complete puppet. He was an old man, fragile, frail, and he was blinded. He was blind now. It's a very painful history. Wallahi, India's history is full of, it is fascinating, but it's also very painful when you actually study it. It's a lot happened with Muslims and Islam in India, and you have to understand the causes and what's behind it. And one of the reasons we are falling behind, on a global scale, is because we don't study our history, we don't take lessons from it. And Allah made a very powerful point out of history in the Quran. So once you don't know your history, you have no desire to do anything great in the future. Because if you don't know the great achievements of the past, how will you have a desire to repeat them again, right? If you don't know of a precedent, if you don't know of the libraries of Baghdad, the libraries of Al-Andalus and the golden age of Islam, how will you have a desire to repeat it? You won't, right? So he wrote this letter to the king of Afghanistan, and the plan was to appoint remove Shah Alam from the throne and put someone who is able to govern India effectively, who can lead the Muslims of India back to glory. Lead the Indian Muslims back to glory the Mughals once had. The Mughals were very, very powerful. Mughals governed India with immense might and power for 150 years. From the time of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, although he drifted away later on, he caused many disasters himself. But from his time to the death of Aurangzeb, 150 years approximately, this was the peak of Indian power. Not only the Muslims prospered, Hindus prospered. There was a Hindu renaissance. Sanskrit works were written, and the poetry and the scholars came up. A lot of these bigots, when they run around and talk about Mughal era was an era of disasters, it was an era of decline of Hindu culture. This is a lie. In fact, Hindus flourished during the Mughal period. And there's a book written by a woman called Audrey Trush. Audrey Trush has written a book titled Culture of Encounters. Culture of Encounters. Sanskrit at the Mughal court. Sanskrit, the language, at the Mughal court. In this book she argues that during the Mughal period, Sanskrit language, far from being sidelined, it flourished. Scholars came up, they wrote works, and the Mughals in fact encouraged them, okay, go and do your work. Do as much as you like. We will, fund your activities. So a lot of this is there in the books, and people have to go and read them. So they wanted to remove the king. So Zaman Shah agreed. And he came to Peshawar. He came as far as Peshawar with his army. Tipu Sultan was with. So the British had now realized what is happening. And now they said, okay, they have already fought how many wars with Tipu Sultan and his father? How many?
Three.
Three wars have already taken place. Anglo-Mysore wars. They are known as Anglo-Mysore wars. Go and Google Anglo-Mysore wars and you will see the details, okay? So 3 have already taken place and the third one resulted in what? What did the third one result in?
Defeat.
Defeat. Half the territory lost to 3 hostile powers, right? And 2 of his sons taken as hostages and then returned some time later after he paid the ransom, 3 crore rupees, which was a lot of money. A lot of money. It was hundreds of millions of pounds today's worth, okay? So he paid that. So now 3 wars are, so the British expected Tipu Sultan to go like a mouse, you know, sit down and wait for his time to come and die. No, he wasn't having it. He said, whether I live or die, I will live by my principles. So that's why he was sending letters. So now they realize that he's communicating with Zaman Shah, the king of Afghanistan. And if he comes into India, that will bring a new problem to India, right? Another army of Pathans, yeah? Subhanallah, those of you who know Pathans, you know what I'm talking about, yeah? Yeah. Another army of Pashtun fighters who came, people remembered, it was in their memory, you know? 1761, the Battle of Panipat, they knew exactly what these people are capable of, right? So the British got very worried. So they got someone from Lucknow, again the state of Awadh, which was primarily Shia state. They got someone from there, Lucknow, and they sent that envoy, or they sent an embassy to Iran. The British were allied to the state of Awadh, and the capital was Lucknow. They got in touch with the Nawab of Awadh and they asked him to send a delegation to Iran and convince the Shah of Iran to attack Afghanistan so that Zaman Shah does not end up in India. This is what happened. The delegation went to Iran. The Shah was convinced. The Shah was already allied to the British. He said, Khalas, no problem. He attacked Zaman Shah's territory. And Zaman Shah, who was in Peshawar, turned around, goes back and defends his territory. Now Tipu Sultan is left alone again. Now Tipu was heavily relying on Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte, if he was victorious in Egypt, the next destination was India for Napoleon. Napoleon was planning to come to India, join Tipu Sultan, and that would have been, and also Tipu Sultan was waiting for a contingent, according to some claims, of 5,000 French soldiers from Mauritius. He had sent a delegation, and this is what caused the final problem between the state of Mysore and the British. Now Richard Wellesley was appointed as the Governor General of the East India Company, and this was a new Governor General who was different to the ones who came before. He came with a policy in his mind. He had his mind made up. We have to get rid of Tipu Sultan. He has to go. Okay, we have had enough. It's too much, and he's too much of a threat. And now what he's doing now, he's sending delegations to Mauritius, he's sending delegations to America, he's talking to Napoleon Bonaparte, he's talking to Zaman Shah, he's talking to everyone, he's talking to local powers in India. So we know that until we get rid of him, he's not going to stop. So they made an excuse that you sent a delegation to Mauritius, now you have to get ready for war. Tipu Sultan said, no, that is not the case. I am not planning, although Tipu Sultan, you know, he was a diplomat, he tried to dissuade war. He said, no, we don't want war. What's the problem? Let's negotiate, let's talk. So Tipu Sultan was actually buying time. He was buying time, he was waiting for those 5,000 French soldiers to join him. Okay, and that would have made a huge difference to the morale of his army. Okay, but Wellesley had realized what Tipu is doing. So he quickly rushed. He said, everyone get together, the Marathas and the Nizam and the British army. He prepared them and on their way. So Tipu Sultan, cut the long story short, sent armies out to fight them, stopped them on the way, did not succeed. In fact, some of his generals betrayed Tipu Sultan. They sold out to the British. One of them was, his name was Muinuddin, and the other one was Mir Sadiq. Mir Sadiq is another man who sold out to the British. And there was another one called Sayyid Ghaffar who died fighting for the Sultan. So cut the long story short, the British were able to besiege the fortress of Seringapatam. And on the way, before they got close to the fortress, because the fortress of Seringapatam is on an island. It is like an island. It is naturally defended, right? It's a river called River Kaveri or Kaveri, okay? And this island is in the middle of the river. So the fortress and the city of Seringapatam was on this island. So it was naturally defended by water, okay? You didn't have to dig a ditch around the fortress. So before they got close to the fortress, the British gave another offer to Tipu Sultan that cede half of your territory. First half is already gone in the Third Anglo-Mysore War. In this war, they said, give half your territory to us, what you have right now, yani reduce your territory even more, right? And then give us a ransom of few crore rupees, even more than the power. Tipu Sultan said, I'm here, come and take me. He said, you want my territory, you want my money, I'm here, come and take me. Okay, so he basically fought. He fought back and he fought like a lion. This is why heavy tributes were paid to him by even the British authors. They praised him for his bravery. That's why they called him the Tiger of Mysore. They called him the Tiger of Mysore because being a king, you know, he was one of the richest men in the world. Tipu Sultan was one of the richest men in the world, and being a king, he didn't have to do that. He fought hand-to-hand battle with British soldiers when he was invaded, and the story is far too long for me to narrate in a short lecture like this. Cut the long story short, gates were shut on him. He couldn't enter by some traitors who had sold out to the British. They shut the gates on him, and then he was left to fight on his own. And one of his servants shouted, the Sultan, why don't you escape? Escape, live today, fight tomorrow. And he looked at his servant and said, have you lost your mind? You think I will run away? And then Sultan fought, and he was shot a few times because the British had learnt where his position is, where he was, and he was shot in his arm, on his side, and in his leg, and he was injured. And how was he killed? Eventually he was killed when he was laying injured. One of his close associates narrates the story. His name was Raja Khan, who was his close companion and servant. He narrates that this is how the Sultan was killed, Shaheed Rahmatullah alayh, that he was injured, laying injured, and one of the British soldiers came to take his belt, you know, because he was a Sultan, he was wearing a very lavish belt, right? So the soldier didn't know this was the man, this was Tipu Sultan. So he came and put his hand on the belt, and Sultan made a cut at him. You know, this is not a time to fight. If you don't want to die, you don't fight, right? You're injured. You have 3 bullets inside you. You don't want to fight. You just want to take the belt, take my clothes as well, but take me to your generals. I want to live, right? No. The Sultan instead makes a cut at the soldier and injures him on leg. And the soldier steps back, pulls the trigger, and shoots the Sultan in the temple. And that was the 4th bullet that entered his body on the day, and he was killed as, inshallah, Shaheed. So Tipu Sultan had willingly given his life for the cause he believed in. The cause was to defend his land, his people, against a tyrannical, oppressive and usurping power which had caused devastation already in Bengal due to his policies, his selfish policies, and it was there to milk or to bleed India dry. This is what Tipu Sultan believed. He believed that the East India Company is only there to bleed India dry. And even in Britain there was a lot of opposition to the policies of East India Company. In Britain there was a lot of noise, a lot of politicians actually against what the East India Company was doing in India. So when I use the word British, I don't mean the whole of British people, no. No, there were politicians and there were people in Britain who were against this policy of the East India Company. So this was a company of merchants who were absolutely selfish, and they devastated the land due to the policies, and that's why Tipu Sultan was fighting them. He had no respect for them because he knew these are business people. They're like Donald Trump, okay, and all they are after is the money and the wealth of the people, and they don't really care about the people, right? So this is why Tipu Sultan Rahmatullah alayh was of that view. Now, why is he Islamic? He has been killed. He was killed on the 4th of May 1799 in the Battle of Seringapatam. Okay, Why are we talking about him? Why is he so special? He's special because firstly, he gave his life for the cause. He did not think twice. Even when he had the chance to escape or to take refuge, he did not give in. He didn't want to live in humiliation in a prison cell or something like that. He was a king, and this is why he was known as a tiger. But what caused him to be like that? What caused that reaction? Okay, why did he compromise? Why did he sell out? Why didn't he give his territory and move to another place? Okay, this is Tipu Sultan we're talking about. A British soldier comes to rob him, an East India Company soldier comes to rob him. He doesn't beg, squeak like a mouse, no. His own servant is saying that we were scared to be with him. And it is described when his body was found by Major Beatson, who has written a book, War with Tipu Sultan, and this book was published literally months later, months after the war, in the year 1800. Book was published. Many books are published in London. This is something I admire the British authors for. At that time, the British authors were actually, here you would have an incident, they would go and write a book about it, and it would be published in London within months. Literally, all the Anglo-Mysore wars are well documented from 1760s to 1799. Allahu Akbar. You pick up the books and newspaper articles and journals written on those wars, and every single minute detail is there. They were the best at record keeping. The British, they knew who is a friend, who is an enemy, who to deal with, who not to deal with. Record keeping ended at the British. Allahu Akbar. Every single minute detail was there. Every single name, every single thing was recorded. Okay, so the second Mysore War, books written on that. Third Anglo-Mysore War, books written on that. Fourth one, literature exploded. There are so many books came out. Then they translated, they found documents in Tipu Sultan's personal cabinets in his divan, where they kept the record, and they found the letters he had written to other kings. Okay, now this was the time for the East India Company to justify its unjust, devastating, cruel war against Tipu Sultan. And what they did was they translated all those letters within months, within weeks. All those Persian letters were translated into English language and published in London in books. I have them. I have the original works in my possession. Okay, the ones that were published in London at the time. So, what was the purpose of publishing these letters? Now, how did they even find them? Firstly, at that time when kings would write letters to other kings, they would always make copies, right? So one letter is sent to that king, okay, and a copy is made of that letter and kept in the record of, like we have a tradition today. Everything is catalogued, everything is logged into a database. Like when presidents or governments communicate with each other, they have records, right? Like Tipu Sultan kept record. So that record was found by the British and then translated it into into English language. So there were French documents, there were Persian documents, and they were translated into English, and then this is how the British East India Company establishment justified the war against Tipu Sultan, because they showed in these letters that, look, a letter to Zaman Shah, and look what he's saying, that this is this is the abode of Islam, and we need to establish Islam. So his language is very Islamic. Tipu Sultan is talking, the language, when you go and read the letters, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. He's giving references from the Quran. He's invoking his Islamic spirit. He's trying to wake him up, Zaman Shah, that you are a Muslim, I'm a Muslim, I'm your brother, you come and help me. Okay, we will establish Islam in this. This was a state which was governed by Tipu Sultan to the best of his ability, and he wanted to bring back the glory of Islam in India. The glory the Mughals had, he was always invoking that glory, right? And because he was not supported as he should have been, he was not successful in doing that. But he remains alive in the collective memory of Muslims and non-Muslims in India. There are Muslims who look up to him as a hero. There are non-Muslims like Hindus and Christians who look up to him as a hero. He did do certain things which are used against him. For example, there is a place called Coorg, or Coorg, I don't know how it's pronounced, C-O-U-R-G, OORG, is a place where there was a large Christian community, and this Christian community was actually siding with the British. They were supplying British with information, and they were, espionage or spying for the British. So he dealt with them very harshly. Tipu Sultan dealt with this particular community very harshly, and that's being used against him until now as a crime in his record. Okay, but on the other hand, we look at the example of French, who were also Christians. They were part of his army. There were Christians in his army. There were Hindus in his army. He didn't discriminate against religions like that on a religious basis. And his Diwan, the most powerful man, one of the most powerful men in Mysore, in the state of Mysore, when Tipu Sultan is governing, is a Hindu. The finance minister, Purnia was Hindu. He was a Brahman Hindu. Purnia was the finance minister because Tipu Sultan found him to be very effective. He could do the job, no problem. Okay, so these are some of the examples from his life. So when he was killed, the British, they wrote lavish tributes to him, they criticized him, and they did all kind of propaganda against him, which has been rubbished by scholars like Kate Brittlebank, who has written this book, and she believes that the British had to paint him negatively to justify their crimes against him. When I say the British, against the East India Company, so I don't mean British in the larger sense, because East India Company represented Britain in India at that time. This is why I am using the word British in that sense. Okay, so not everyone agreed with that policy. Okay, anyway, so she basically states, and she's an Australian scholar. She is from Australia. She has done a PhD on Tipu Sultan. She has written another book which is highly academic. I forgot the title of that book, but Google Tipu Sultan Kate Brittlebank, and you will see her works on Tipu Sultan, some articles and some of the books she has written. So she believes that the negative perception or the negative propaganda against Tipu Sultan was deliberately pumped out by the British historians in the 19th century, and this is the propaganda which RSS and BJP has picked up today, and they're using it against Tipu Sultan, but the objective picture is completely different. He was a very upright, noble man who did things for reasons, and in the 18th century he was living in a very hostile environment. Now, what about the man himself? What did he achieve? When they found his body, the soldiers, Duke of Wellington, have you heard of him? Who is that? Arthur Wellesley. The Duke of Wellington, very, very well known in British history, right? And he fought the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon Bonaparte, and in 1815 Napoleon was captured in this very battle, and Britain was saved by Duke of Wellington, right? Arthur Wellesley, and Napoleon was imprisoned in the island of St. Helena, and he died in 1821. So Arthur Wellesley was actually present in person when Tipu Sultan's body was found. He was there. He was part of the battle. He was there because he was the younger brother of Richard Wellesley, who was the Governor General. So Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, who is now the Duke in the making, was there. He was actually made in India. Whatever he became, India was his training ground, right? So when they found the body, Major Beatson, he was there who found the body, and when they found his body was warm, even though he had been dead for hours, his body was warm, his eyes were open, and for a second they thought he was alive. So when his pulse was checked, they realized he has passed out, he has passed away, and it was determined conclusively that he is dead. Tipu Sultan is dead. And then he describes, Major Beatson describes him what he looked like. He states that he had an impression of dignity on his face. He stood out, even though he was dead. Among people, he stood out as a special person. There was dignity on his face. His eyes were open, his eyes were big, his color was rather dark, and he had lost his turban. His head was uncovered, and he had very small hands, and he was short in stature. He was not a big giant man, he was a short guy, small stature. And according to most estimates, this is what he looked like, Tipu Sultan. A lot of people actually believe that he had a beard because they can't fathom the fact that someone clean shaven can do such great deeds and represent Islam in ways he had done, but he had no, because he had hardly any hair on his body. You know, some people, even when you look at some Bengali brothers, you know, they have beard literally here on the chin, yeah, or some of the Japanese brothers or Chinese guys, you know, so some people have no hair on their body naturally. He had very little hair on his body, as is documented historically. So he had very small portion of hair on his chin, and he used to remove that. So Tipu Sultan was killed in that way, and then the next day when he was buried with utmost respect and dignity, and the British gave him the military protocol by supplying soldiers to accompany his funeral, and you know, I don't know how many guns salute was actually presented. You know, they have a salute for a special person, and many guns salute was presented, or you know, dedicated to Tipu Sultan, and British officers have recorded this. Now this is something very strange. This is something very strange that happened. That on that very same night, when they buried the Sultan, now this is not the Muslim historians documenting this, by the way. This is Colonel Bailey, who was present at the time, who was writing his own experience, what happened. He said, as soon as we buried the Sultan, and when we took his janaza, you know, when his janaza was being taken away, Hindu women were crying in the streets. You know, when his janaza is passing, Hindu women, not Muslims, you know, they were crying and they were pulling their hair out of grief the Sultan has died, because they loved him so much, right? And so were the Muslims. Muslims are mourning the death in their own way. And when the janaza was taken, it was buried. He was buried right next to his father Hyder Ali, and there's a mausoleum now in Mysore. This is where Iqbal, the poet, was to go later on and pay a tribute to him in Persian language, which we'll talk about in due course. Actually, I can mention it right now. Iqbal later on in 1929 visited the grave of Tipu Sultan. Iqbal was a famous poet in the Indian subcontinent, and he wrote poetry in Urdu, Persian and Arabic. Muhammad Iqbal is very well known. Those of you who don't know him, know that he was one of the greatest poets who ever lived in the Indian subcontinent. He died in 1938. He, in 1929, visited the tomb of Tipu Sultan, and he was with a lot of people because he was already a legend, living legend in India at the time, because his poetry was so well received. So there were a lot of people with him. So when he went into the tomb, he asked everyone to leave. He asked everyone to leave him alone. He sat down, and witnesses state that he was crying for hours. For hours, Muhammad Iqbal was crying, sitting next to the grave of Tipu Sultan. And they didn't disturb him. When he came out 3 to 4 hours later, and I've read this in articles written by eyewitnesses, people who were there with him, Iqbal. So he came out and they asked him, what message do you have on this occasion? And then he said his famous words, dedicated to Tipu Sultan. Dar jahan atwan agar mardan azist, ham choon mardan jan supurdan zindagi ist. If it is not possible to live life like a man, then it is better to give life away like a man. Dar jahan natwan agar mardan azist, ham chu mardan jan supurdan zindagi ist. Then true life is giving life away like a man. So this is the tribute Iqbal paid to his grave. And another tribute he paid in his Javed Nama. Iqbal, having come back in 1929 to his hometown Lahore in Punjab, he wrote the ultimate, the best poetry of Iqbal is known as a collection called Javed Nama. Javed Nama is in Persian, it's not in Urdu. Okay, so Persian speaking people can better appreciate it. And Iqbal. Muhammad Iqbal is possibly more loved and appreciated in Iran than he is in Pakistan. Because Pakistanis can only understand Urdu poetry of Iqbal. But Persian is thought to be even deeper, even more pleasant. And he wrote this book called Javed Nama, a collection of poetry, and many poems were put in Javed Nama. And the end of Javed Nama is on Tipu Sultan. There is a tribute Iqbal has paid in Persian language to Tipu Sultan. It's a long tribute, and one of the verses goes as follows: Zindagi ra cheest rasmodin kesh yak dam sheri basal mesh, that what is life and its regulations and its conventions. Okay? And then he answers the question, what is life, its regulations and conventions? He answers the question, yak dam sheri basal mesh, that one moment of a lion is better than 100 years of sheep. One moment of a lion is better than 100 years of sheep. This is what Iqbal wrote in Javed Nama about Tipu Sultan. So he was put in this tomb, in this grave next to his father, Hyder Ali. And when they walked away, this is the point I wanted to make earlier. When they walked away, having buried him, Colonel Bailey, who is an eyewitness, reports that a storm emerged that we have never seen or heard or witnessed anything like it. He describes it. And I would love to read that particular part so that you can all understand what I'm talking about. Because Bailey, Bayly, the book is Diary of Colonel Bailey, 12th Regiment, 1796 to 1803, London. And it was published in 1896. The diary was published in 1896, almost a century later. Okay? He states, I must relate the effects and appearance of a tremendous storm of wind, rain, thunder and lightning that ensued on the afternoon of the burial of Tipu Sahib. I had returned to camp excessively indisposed. About 5 o'clock, a darkness of unusual obscurity came on, and volumes of huge clouds were hanging within a few yards of the earth. In a motionless state, suddenly a rushing wind with irresistible force raised pyramids of sand to an amazing height and swept most of the tents and marquees in frightful eddies far from their sight. 10 Lashkars, with my own exertions, clinging to the bamboos of the marquee, scarcely preserved its fall. The thunder cracked in appalling peals close to our ears, and the vivid lightning tore up the ground in long ridges all around. Such a scene of desolation can hardly be imagined. Lashkar struck dead, as also an officer and his wife in a marquee a few yards from mine. Bullocks, elephants and camels broke loose and scampering in every direction over the plain. Every hospital tent blown away, leaving the wounded exposed, unsheltered to the elemental strife. In one of these alone, 18 men who had suffered amputation had all the bandages saturated and were found dead on the spot the ensuing morning. The funeral party escorting Tipu's body to the mausoleum of his ancestors, situated in the Lal Bagh garden, where the remains of his warlike father Hyder Ali had been deposited, were overtaken at the commencement of this furious whirlwind, and the soldiers ever after were impressed with the firm persuasion that His Satanic Majesty attended in person at the funeral procession. The flashes of lightning were not as usual from far distant clouds, but proceeded from heavy vapors within a very few yards of the earth. No part of artillery could have vomited forth such incessant peals as the loud thunder that exploded close to our ears. Astonishment, dismay, and prayers for its cessation was our solitary alternative. A fearful description of the Day of Judgment might have been depicted from the appalling storm of this awful night. I have experienced hurricanes, typhoons, and gales of wind at sea, but never in the whole course of my existence had I seen anything comparable to this desolating visitation. Heaven and earth appeared absolutely to have come in collision, and no bounds set to the destruction. The roaring of the wind strove in competition with the stunning explosions of the thunder, as if the universe was once more returning to chaos. In one of these wild sweeps of the hurricane, the poles of my tent were riven to atoms, and the canvas wafted forever from my sight. I escaped without injury, as also my exhausted Lascars, and casting myself in an agony of despair on the sands, I fully expected instant annihilation. My hour was not, however, come. Towards morning the storm subsided, the clouds became more elevated, the thunder and lightning ceased, and nature once more resumed a serene aspect. But never shall I forget that dreadful night to the latest day of my existence. All language is inadequate to describe its horrors. Rather than be exposed to such another scene, I would prefer the front of 100 battles. Colonel Bailey. This happened on the day they buried Tipu Sultan. A storm of major magnitude came. Suddenly, when they walked away from the grave, a storm came. Now, some people can say it's a natural phenomenon, something natural happened. Others, like Muslims, I as a Muslim believe there was something there, that perhaps Allah was trying to make a point, that you have committed a grave crime, not only against the people of India, against the people of the world, that such a man has been killed. Now, who is this man? Very quickly, I want to summarize now. It has gone on for very long, this lecture. Who is this man? Why was he so special? When they found documents in his private chamber, in his palace in Sarangapatam, they found a booklet, a manuscript written in his own hand. It was a booklet like this, a small booklet written by Tipu Sultan himself. It was a manuscript in his own writing. Are you all clear on that? Yes? So when the British officers, East India Company officers came in, started to search his chambers, one of the servants told them that there is a booklet which Sultan reads with utmost care and keeps it as a secret. No one is allowed in the palace to touch it. No one is allowed. In fact, when he's reading it, when we walk into the room as servants, he hides it. And he turns around to the servants and asks, what do you want? Because he's busy reading that particular book. So that book must be very special. So they found it. It was Tipu Sultan's own handwriting, and he had documented his dreams. The dreams he would have, he had documented them in this booklet. And there are a few dreams, and they have been translated into English as well as Urdu. In Urdu, you can find the dreams of Tipu Sultan published, titled Khwab Nama Tipu Sultan, and translation was done by a scholar called Salimuddin Qureshi, who passed away recently, less than a year ago in London. Not many people knew him, unfortunately. Then the English translation, also done by Salimuddin Qureshi later on, and there was an earlier one by Mahmud Hussain. In these dreams, you can see the man. When you hear about someone's dreams, you know what the man is like. Do you agree? And these dreams are not for public. This is very clear. He was writing these for his own memory, for his own keeping. He was not exposing them to public. This was his private, solitarily private for him. What are the dreams? There are many, but I will narrate a couple of them. In one of the dreams, he states that I was asleep, and he writes the time when he woke up, that this is when I had this dream on such and such date at such time. When he wakes up, he immediately picks up the diary and he starts the dream. He starts writing the dream. So it is in his own handwriting. So I want you to go and Google Dreams of Tipu Sultan. You will find a link to the British Museum, British Library. You will find a link to the British Library. That's where the manuscript is today. Currently, the manuscript is in the British Library keeping. It is there in London. Okay, and they have an article with the translation of 3 dreams and the pictures of those pages, so you can go and look at them. So one of the dreams is that Tipu Sultan states that I was asleep, I woke up, and in my dream, Ali radiallahu anh came and he asked me to come with him, to accompany him somewhere. And I asked him, where do you want to go? Where do you want me to go? He said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah, is waiting for you because he wants to enter Jannah with you. Subhanallah. This is a private dream. He is not exposing this to public. He is not showing off. In fact, his servants state that when we would walk in, he would hide it. He said, Ali radiallahu anh came to me and told me that the Prophet is waiting for you, and he said that he wants to enter Jannah with you. And then he writes at the end, without praising too much, about himself, without writing too much praise about himself, he says, Sanad Ubas. Yeah, this is all I have to say. I have nothing else to say. Full stop. Another dream he documents very quickly, that when he was fighting the Marathas in one of the battles, the Marathas were on the other side of the river, he was on this side, and while he is in his camp, while he is in the military camp, he's sleeping and he has a dream. In the dream, a man comes dressed as a woman. A man comes dressed, are you listening? Dressed as a woman in his dream. So he starts joking with him and starts, then he states that I realize that I'm a king, I should not be joking like this with this person. So this feminine looking man got up and started dancing in front of me. Started dancing, and then he opened his hair and he opened his clothes as well. And then I realized that this feminine looking man is actually a woman. It's not a man. And then I woke up. Okay? And then he said, I went to my generals and I spoke to them. I had this dream, and the meaning of this dream is that the Marathas on the other side are actually women in men's clothing. They are actually women in men's clothing. So he ordered an attack. Based upon that dream, Tipu Sultan ordered an immediate attack with few hundred men, not few thousand, few hundred men. The king himself attacked the Maratha camp, and they all ran like women. These are his words. They all ran like women. Okay? So these are two dreams Tipu Sultan documents of him, and they can be found in this manuscript. This is the man. Now, very quickly, the question. A lot of people ask this question, was Tipu Sultan Shia? Because his father's name is Haidar Ali, and his name is Fateh Ali Muhammad Tipu, and he used the title for himself, Asadullah al-Ghalib, and he obviously loved Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu very much. Was he Shia? A lot of people ask this question. The answer is that Tipu Sultan was not Shia. This is an academic point, because people have been asking this question for a number of years, whether Tipu Sultan was Shia or not. This is an academic point, not a sectarian point, again, to highlight the question. Tipu Sultan was not Shia, he was a staunch Sunni. He was Sunni because if you look at his coinage, which he himself minted, he had he had coins minted in his own name, okay, with the picture, with the statement about the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the inscription is there, Deen Muhammad. I forgot the actual inscription, but it is there that the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is for the whole world. It is for the whole world, okay? And Huwa Sultan al-Adil al-Wahid. It says that he is the just Sultan, the only one. Just Sultan, the only one. So justice is declared even on his coins. But what did he call his coins? What were the names of the coins? The gold coin, the biggest one, which was about 11 grams of gold, was called Ahmadi, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The gold coin, 11 grams of gold, was called Ahmadi. The one after that, which is about nearly 6 grams of gold, was called Siddiqui, after Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh. The one after that, which was about nearly 4 grams of gold, or less than 4 grams of gold, was called Faruqi. So here we have Ahmadi, Siddiqui and Faruqi in sequence, and then comes Haydari, then comes Uthmani, and then comes other names of 12 Imams, Bakari and Imami and other names, yeah. So what is Tipu Sultan doing? He is actually demonstrating what his Aqidah is as a Sunni, that he considers the Prophet ﷺ to be the topmost. After the Prophet, it is Abu Bakr Siddiq. After that, it is Faruq. And then it is Uthman and Ali. And then the rest of the 12 Imams of the Shia. We also believe in them. We believe in the 12 Imams. We believe in them. Okay, we believe they were righteous people. Whether what has been transmitted in their name is true or not is another question altogether. But we believe in them. We believe in Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. We believe in Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. We believe in Imam Musa al-Kazim. We believe in Imam Imam Jawad or Imam Ali Rida. Okay, we believe in Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Askari. We believe in these Imams, right? So the question is, this is one point, that this demonstrates that Tipu Sultan was not Shia by inclination, he was Sunni. Another point is that a book was written by his orders for his military. It's called Fathul Mujahideen. It was published in Pakistan in 1950 by a scholar, by an academic called Mahmood Hussain, who was the brother of the ex-president of India, Zakir Hussain. Have you heard of Zakir Hussain? Zakir Hussain was once upon a time the president of India. His own blood brother, Mahmood Hussain, was in Pakistan. Amazingly, one brother is the president of India, the other brother is representing Pakistan in the UN. this is ajib, subhanallah, because they were both brothers and they were both scholars, and they were both scholars of huge magnitude, great people, right? Just people, good people. Zakir Hussain was the president of India. At the same time, his brother was representing Pakistan in the United Nations, Mahmood Hussain. Mahmood Hussain was a scholar on Tipu Sultan, so he published Tipu Sultan's book Fathul Mujahideen, which was published for his army, the Muslim contingent of the army. In this, there are rules of engagement, military tactics, and things like that. And when the book starts with moral teachings. Who are you? Belief in Allah, belief in the messenger. Okay, how do you do your salah, making wudu? Subhanallah. So this book is published for the military of Tipu Sultan. This is what we believe, that he was very dedicated to Islam. Even when it came to his military, he wanted to give them Islam as a present, as a gift, right? So he published this document for his military, for every single soldier. So you make wudu like this, you make salah like this. Now amazingly, listen carefully, the book is written by a man called Zainul Abidin Shostari. Zainul Abidin Shostari, who was a Persian, Iranian Persian, who had written the book in Persian, and who was himself Shia. But he was commanded by the Sultan to write this book. He was commanded. And amazingly, a Shia author is writing this book on behalf, on the behest of the Sultan. What evidence does he use? What does he use? What evidence does he use in the book? The method of prayer is the Sunni method. The method of wudu is the Sunni method. The evidence he brings in on the very first page of the very first chapter, Bab Awwal of the book Fathul Mujahideen, and he states, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh riwayat karda ast, that Umar bin Khattab narrates, and the hadith goes on. The first hadith of the first chapter is from Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. Does that sound like a Shia book? Does that sound like a Shia book? No, it doesn't. Umar is the last person you will find in a Shia book, except if it's in a negative way. Umar will never be given a positive coverage. So this is a point I wanted to make. So that's from the book Fathul Mujahideen. Copies are there. You can go and have a look at them if you can find them. They're very difficult to find. I have managed to find a couple of them through my hard work. And another point, when you look at Tipu Sultan's weaponry, now this is something about the man, the genius. Okay, he is known to this day as a military genius. He is known to this day as a military genius. Why? Because he invented rockets. He invented rockets. Invented, when I say invented, he's not the first one to use rockets. Okay, but he used them the way they were used later on in war. Okay, so his name is among the inventors of rocket technology. So Tipu Sultan used it effectively. One of the ways he would use it is he would attach swords, blades with a rocket, and he would fire them at the enemy, and when the rocket would land, it would be spinning. So not only that it would explode, it would in the process cut 4, 5, 6 people in before it lands. So there are documentaries on this on YouTube. You can go and watch, how he used his rocket technology. And in 1812, the British used the same technology, same methodology in the war. Okay, in 1812, the British used the same technology, same ideas, borrowed from Tipu Sultan, rahmatullah alayh. On top of that, Tipu Sultan was producing top of the range weapons in Sarangapattu. The best weapons produced in the world, even better than the French weapons. What he did was, he hired French engineers to come and train his own people in Sarangapattu. So there were engineers working in Seringapatam producing top of the range weapons, guns, cannons, pistols in Seringapatam. So have you seen those 18th century weapons, matchlock guns? They used to pump them, they used to put the gunpowder inside and then they would press it like this with a stick, not like a stick, with a rod, okay? And then they would put the bullet, which was like a ball, musket ball, and they would shoot, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? Before these modern weapons came out. So they were being produced in Seringapatam at that time. On his weapons, he would have statements like, for example, the name of the four Khulafa, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, right? So you have a matchlock, big gun, produced in Seringapatam, and when you zoom in onto it, there is poetry in Persian on it to, praise the one who carries the gun or the one who made it and the one who is one who has provided a means to make it. The Sultan is being praised, and then there are names of the four Khulafa, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, on weapons produced in Seringapatam by the Sultan himself. Okay. Then there are books in his library. So he produced some of the best weapons in the world. When you look at the quality, you go on Google image weapons of Tipu Sultan, you will see the swords, the best swords produced in the world. He had a library of 2,000 books. A library of 2,000 books, and the library gives you the impression, when you look at the library, all the books belong to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay, books on, for example, Persian poetry. Okay, books Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Sahih Muslim, Bukhari. The catalogue was published in 1811 by a British officer. The entire catalogue of Tipu Sultan's library can be found on internet free of charge. The actual book, you can see it there. Google Books has a free PDF copy of it. You can take it. 1811 was the year when the catalogue was published. When you look at the catalogue, this doesn't belong to someone who is not a Sunni. So Tipu Sultan was a staunch Sunni in that sense. Having said all of this, he was a scholar, he was an innovator in technology, he was a thinker, he was a strategist, he was a ruler, he was a father, he was a son, he was a husband. In any form or shape, when you study him, you get fascinated. He was a diplomat, he was a negotiator. When he sent his delegations to the king of Afghanistan, he sent soldiers with the delegation to protect the presence, because gifts, kings send gifts to other kings, right? And he doesn't want his delegation to be robbed on the way by bandits. So he sent a contingent, an army contingent, with the delegation to protect the belongings. And then what instructions does he give? The instructions he gives to his envoy or his delegation, that make sure you pray 5 times a day. On your way, you are praying your salah. Do not make your salah, and the soldiers as well. Who is documenting this? The British. To prove what point? He was a religious bigot. Look how dedicated he is to Islam. And the evidence is his language, his demeanor, his coinage, his weapons, everything has Allah's name, Muhammad's name, and the four Khulafa's name. Everything, even the binding of the book. You pull out a binding. Okay, can you pass me the Quran, please? One of the copies of the Quran. Okay. A Quran was found in his library, which is in Cambridge University, by the way. It's here in Cambridge University, they're keeping it. A Quran found in Tipu Sultan's library, his personal copy. When you look at the bindings he did himself. He was taking care of, he was involved in botany, making sure the best seed is brought to Seringapatam so people can prosper. Hindus and Muslims. Breast silkworms. Silkworms? Best silkworms are brought to Seringapatam so that we can have the best silk in the world. The best wooden toys were made in Seringapatam. You name it, his factories. Some people believe, like one of the scholars who has written on Tipu Sultan extensively, Dr. B. Sheikh Ali, he's a scholar who is still alive in Mysore. He wrote that if Tipu was not killed in 1799, there would have been an industrial revolution in India before it took place in Britain. There would have been an industrial revolution in India before it took place in Britain, 50 years before that. Because he was on his way to rise, and he had understood the importance of technology, importance of innovation, and he was producing the best product. On this Quran, the copy that was found in his library, on the binding, you have the name of the four Khulafa written, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. and it's a copy of the Quran, and you can go and see the binding. If you type again Tipu Sultan's Quran, you will find an entire scan of it. You will find the whole copy scanned online. It is available online. You will see it. So by looking at these things, you come to realize this man was a deeply dedicated man, not only to his family, not only to his people, not only to Hindus, not only to Muslims, not only to others, but to his religion, his deen, very much. He took Islam very seriously. And the more you read about him, you will understand that the reason why he was given the status of Shahada is because his love for Islam. There's a lot more I can say, brothers and sisters. There's a lot more I can share with you on him, but my time has run out. I have spoken already for almost 2 hours, I think, on this topic, and hopefully you will enjoy this lecture. And if you have any feedback, please do send it to me, and I will correct myself for the future. Thank you so much.